Okay, this is final project, CJJ2002, fall session. This is for the annotation. Number one is define and explain the term juvenile delinquency. Juvenile delinquency is an act by a minor that violates the penal code of the government with authority over the area which act of occurs. There are different juvenile court codes in every state, and they decide what constitutes delinquency and conditions under which states can legitimately intervene in juveniles' life. There is also juveniles that are considered high-risk children, and they can further divide into delinquents and status offenders, of which some can end up in adult court or jail. There is also a medical definition for juvenile delinquency. It says conduct of a juvenile characterized by antisocial behavior that is beyond parental control and therefore subject to legal action. Also, a violation of the law committed by a juvenile. It is not punishable by death or life imprisonment. Maybe to understand the term juvenile delinquent, we need to look at the history. The origins of juvenile justice system and the law have long defined the line between juvenile and adult offenders, but the line has been drawn in different places for different reasons. Early in United States history, the law was heavily influenced by the common law of England, which governed the American colonies. One of the most important English lawyers at the time was William Blackstone. Blackstone's commentaries on laws in England, first published in the late 1760s, were widely read and admired by our nation's founders. One section of his commentaries, Blackstone identified people who were incapable of committing a crime. Two things were required to hold someone accountable for a crime. First, the person had to have a vicious will, that is, the intent to commit a crime. Second, the person had to commit an unlawful act. If either the will or the act was lacking, no crime was committed. The first group of people Blackstone identified was incapable of committing a crime were infants. These are not infants in the modern sense of the word, but children too young to fully understand their actions. Blackstone and his contemporaries drew the line between infant and adult at the point to where one could understand one's actions. Children under the age of 7 was, as a rule, classified as infants who could not be guilty of a felony. The felony is serious crimes such as burglary, kidnapping, and murder. Children over the age of 14 were liable to suffer as adults and found guilty in the crime. In Blackstone's time, there were children sentenced to death for capital crimes. Number 2. Identify some of the major causes of juvenile delinquency. There are all kinds of explanations for delinquent behavior. Knowledge of both prevalence and incidence of delinquency is necessary if we're going to understand the extent of youth crime. There are possible explanations for delinquent behavior. It is possible that delinquent behavior is a conscious choice, in contrast to the unconscious influence exerted by some. Some people suggest that much of delinquency is caused not by the factors beyond offenders' control, but by a conscious thought process that considers the cost and benefits of a particular behavior with some degree of planning and foresight, goes on to reason whether the behavior is desirable or not. On the other hand, if something as simple as a first name can impact a person's behavior, then they may not be able to make fully conscious choice. Some professionals wonder if young people have the opportunity to learn how to act legally and morally. This kind of deterministic view that delinquents cannot stop themselves from committing socially unacceptable behavior because of some overpowering influence builds on the perspective known as positivism, a major a position in criminology. Positivism is defined as a philosophical system that holds that every rationally justifiable assertion can be scientifically verified or is capable of logical and mathematical proof, and it therefore rejects metaphysics and theism. The theory that laws are to be understood by social rules valid because they are enacted by an authority or derived logically from existing decisions, and that idea of moral consideration should not limit the scope or the operation of law. The significance in the development of theories that others do not in such cases, the effects of life circumstances, a lack of moral development can place adolescents on a trajectory with tragic consequences. Number 3, discuss the importance of public school system relative to the detection of prevention of juvenile. Some of the most predictive factors in delinquency are the school's relationship and experiences. When a child leaves its family for school, that is where they spend the majority of their day. For the generation of delinquent behavior, the school is a critical social content. If a child fails in school, it can lead to a desire to resist authority, as a child may rebel, which leads to further failure and unfavorable behavior. Children with bad grades and low academic performance will readily act out more often and frequently commit more deliberate and violent offenses and persist in their offending. There is considerable evidence that school has become an arena for learning delinquent behavior. If we look at the history of the education in the United States, we learn something of school and its relationship to delinquent behavior. In the 19th century, in the history of American education, U.S. schools were chaotic and violent. This led to a progressive educational movement which addresses reform in the classroom methods and the students would have more questions, be more creative, and involved in the process of their own education. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court decision that ruled racial segregation in schools unconstitutional was a pivotal event in history of American education. The baby boom in the 1950s resulted in increased enrollments of more formalized student-teacher contracts in public schools. Public education had now become more expensive. Now, since the 1980s, dire warnings have been issued concerning the state of education in this country. Some of these newer aspects of vandalism, violence, and bullying, it seems that now there is 1 in 7 students that are bullied in grades from kindergarten to 12th grade in high school. The psychological effects of bullying can cause some to become bullies themselves. They want to retaliate, and now in the cyber age, they can do it more effectively to more children without the physical contact. Number 4, identify the problem areas that have an influence upon juvenile delinquency between peers, parents, and school. Most youngsters are influenced by their family, school, and peers. It is a process of socialization occurring within the social institutions that, along with social structure, that provide the forces that insulate youth from or influence them to commit delinquent acts. Several theories focusing on social process have been widely used to explain juvenile delinquency. One is differential association theory, drift theory, social theory, for example, become popular in the 1960s because they provided there's that word again, theoretical, here it is, excuse me, theoretical mechanism for popular understanding acts of social environment as determinants of individual behavior. Differential association theory examines how delinquents learn how from others. Drift theory proposes that any examination and processes of becoming a deviant may take seriously both the internal components and the individual and the influences of external environment. Social control theory provides an explanation of why some young people violate the law while others resist pressures to become delinquent. As with peers and delinquency, one of the most consistent findings in delinquency research is there is a correlation between peer behavior and delinquency. There are neighborhoods in which children live in their environment and has some effect on delinquency. If a child lives in a high crime area or a neighborhood with greater opportunities for crime, then the peer effects appear initially strong. On the other hand, in its scenario, if a child lives in a neighborhood where there are fewer opportunities for crime, then the effects on peer behavior is initially small. When drug and substance abuse comes into play with peers, that depends again on the neighborhood and environment. In other words, in neighborhoods where drugs are readily available, it would be a greater effect on delinquency, opportunities for crime, and negative peer influence. There is a number of family factors that have been identified as being associated with delinquency behavior. There is a direct relationship between broken homes and delinquency. As with single-parent homes, there has also been an examination on the effect of juvenile delinquents appears to come disproportionately from single-parent homes. There has been evidence with the birth order that the middle child is more likely to exhibit delinquent behavior. There is also some evidence that suggests that children from larger family size generally engage in more delinquency. In conclusion, relationships between delinquency and family is difficult to nail down, as there are many conflicting findings. Good quality home life and adequate supervision and discipline at home is a start in the right direction. Number 5, explain the proceedings of juvenile court system. When a juvenile is suspected of violating a criminal statute, the procedure that follows is very different from that is used with adult offenders in a typical criminal case. All states have created a special juvenile court system for minors who get into trouble with the law. And although some minors are ultimately judged to be delinquent by their juvenile courts, the different players in the typical juvenile case, including police officers, prosecutors, judges, have a broad discretion to fashion out other outcomes. How police deal with juveniles is there at a number of ways that the minor might come into contact with law enforcement over alleged violation of criminal statute. Some minors are arrested by police, while others are referred to the police by the parents or school officials. Regardless of how the police get wind of the potential juvenile case, a police officer may decide to deal with the juvenile in several ways. They may issue a warning. The police officer can detain the minor, issue a warning, and then let the minor go. This is often referred to as counsel and release alternative. They may hold a minor until the parents come to claim them, and then sometimes a police officer will detain the minor, issue a warning, and then release the minor to the custody of the parent or guardian. The police officer may also place a juvenile in custody and refer the case to juvenile court. When a case goes to juvenile court, the police officer refers the case to juvenile court. The prosecutor of the court and the juvenile court intake officer, often a probation officer, take over. The that person may decide to dismiss the case, handle the matter informally, or file formal charges, called petitioning the case. In deciding how to proceed, the prosecutor or intake officer will typically consider the severity of the offense, the juvenile's age and past record, also the strength of the case against the child. The juvenile's gender always plays a part. Boys are often charged more than girls. They will look at a juvenile's social history and school grades too, and the ability to control the parents have over their kid. If formal proceedings or petitioning of the case is started by the prosecutor or probation officer, he or she will file a petition in juvenile court. The minor is then arraigned and formally charged in front of the juvenile court judge or referee. In some cases, the court may decide to send the juvenile to adult criminal court. The court will also determine whether the minor should be detained or released from the time period before the initial hearing. In about 80% of cases, processed formally in juvenile court, the judge allows for a minor to remain at home while waiting a hearing. If a minor's case remains in juvenile court, one of three things may happen. The child enters a plea agreement, the judge diverts the case, or the judge holds an adjudication hearing. Number 6. Compare the advantages and disadvantages of juvenile incarceration. One disadvantage is juveniles are in adult jails. It is considered short-term confinement. Although a number of juveniles in adult jails is shrinking, there is still states that are not in full compliance with the CJJ2002 jail removal mandate. The claim is frequently made that the state lacks the necessary resources and alternatives to implement the mandate. Data published in 2006 said the estimated 7,083 youths younger than 18 were held in adult jails. One advantage, though, is that the belief that if and when all children are released from adult jails, they will no longer be subjugated to the harmful effects of jail confinement. They would be separated from the sights and sounds and criteria of adult jail. That advantage would be sufficient to protect juveniles from adult inmates and influences. Sometimes called juvenile hall, another short-term confinement facility is detention centers where juveniles are held while awaiting resolution of their case, as they are only meant to be temporary holding centers. They are operated as state, city, county, and regional detention facility. One disadvantage is their traditional detention center has sparked many horror stories on more than one occasion. Some detention centers have described as having a toxic environment. One advantage is that lately, through the last 2 decades, detention centers in the United States have experienced a marked improvement. Another advantage in lieu of detention centers is attention homes. The purpose of the homes is to give juveniles attention rather than detention, as the name implies. There are facilities that have no fences, locked doors, or other physical restraints. They also provide more extensive programming and involvement between residents and the staff. In spite of the overall improvement, detention practices still exist many disturbing features in the United States. One serious disadvantage is that over half of them have no treatment programs, and that an increasing number of detention centers have turned to mechanical restraints and isolation to control their population. Another short-term facility would be a shelter care facility. The facility is meant to provide short-term care for status offenders or dependent and neglected youth. These places are an advantage and a godsend for youth. The disadvantage, though, is the length of stay can be only from overnight to a few days while awaiting, let's say, family therapy. Another disadvantage is that children end up afterwards in the same disadvantaged homes that they came from initially. Also, there has been an increase in the population due to JJDPA's mandate. Another short term, after short term, we have long-term confinements for juveniles, which in my view is a disadvantage for the youth because now they are truly involved in the system for the long haul, which at 18 years of age could mean a transfer to adult prison. Now, I'm not saying these facilities don't help, such as reception, diagnostic centers, ranches and wilderness camps and training schools. It is just at the point where they feel lost from their goals and they could have had and their dreams. My references for all this had been the 9th edition book that we're reading for juvenile delinquency. Let's see. Also, class notes that I've been taking. And I think there was another. Oh, the Legal Encyclopedia. And that's it. Thank you.